Joel, to start off, why is Christian Solidarity International named the way it is? Of course, we know what international means, but what does it mean that we are Christian and that we're in solidarity?
The simplest way to put it is that we're in solidarity with people who are persecuted for their faith or for their religious identity. So when we speak about our human rights grounding, we're grounded in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which protects religious freedom for all people, all human beings in the world. But we're a Christian organization by identity, and we also have biblical foundations for our work. So there we look to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, where the Apostle Paul describes all Christians around the world as one body, the body of Christ. And what our president, John Eibner, often says is, if you had a rusty nail sticking in your foot and your hand didn't move to take the nail out of your foot, we would say there's something wrong with your nervous system. So if one part of the body of Christ is suffering in, say, Bangladesh or Sudan, and the body of Christ in the United States or in Switzerland doesn't react, we'd say we have a problem. We have a spiritual problem. So Christian Solidarity International is meant to address that problem. We're trying to restore the nervous system of the body of Christ. We're trying to act on behalf of the other parts of the body of Christ that are persecuted. But our other biblical foundation is the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the hero of the story that Jesus tells helps the person who's wounded, lying on the side of the road, without asking who he is, what religion he is, where he comes from. He just sees that this person is in need of help, and he helps. And that's often the case in our work. When we go to a country where Christians are suffering, we will find other people who are in the same situation, and we don't turn away from them.
Vishal, we know of, a lot of our advocacy work is in the Middle East, the birthplace of Christianity, but you work in Southern Asia. Now, can you tell me a little bit about this region and what are the topics concerning Christians in Southern Asia? What do those communities look like?
Yeah, quickly, just for the context, we are looking at about 18 countries in South and Southeast Asia. And the total population is about 2.7 billion, which is nearly 35% of the global population. And we have several minority communities in these two regions. We have Christians as a minority. We have Muslims in certain countries are minority. And in certain countries, you find that Hindus or Buddhists are in minority. And sadly, most of the communities are persecuted, but more so Christians. And although I'm saying that they are in minority, I'm talking about 150 million Christians. So which means that more than the entire population of Germany or France, any Western country except the United States, of course, it's more than 300 million. And if you look at the kind of persecution, you hear of murders and physical beatings, discrimination, social ostracism, and marginalization. And if we look at, what fuels religious persecution in this region, you will find that, around 8 of the countries are Muslim majority, and you have political Islam there, where Islam or Islamic law is interpreted in a very particular manner, which is very literal, and which does not leave any space for minorities, especially Christians. And then we also have nationalism. We have Hindu nationalism, we have Buddhist nationalism, in countries like India and Nepal, which are Hindu majority. And then we have several Buddhist majority countries where either we have Buddhist nationalism or we have communism, like Vietnam and Laos. So when it comes to Buddhist and Hindu nationalism, the whole nation is equated with the dominant culture of the majority community, which leaves very little space for Christians and other minorities to play a role or have their place in the country, and many a times Christians are seen as portrayed as outsiders in their own countries. Then when it comes to communism, of course, there is intrinsic tension between communism, which sees religion as a form of social control. But there is also this perception that because Christianity, a religion like Christianity, would require people to gather, to form an assembly, which is seen as a threat by communist governments and authoritarian governments, because nobody is allowed to form association, because that is like, if you can gather, you can become a threat for the regime.
Now, what are some of the platforms we use to promote our advocacy and, for example, the United Nations? What avenues does that open for us to raise specific cases?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so CSI, Christian Solidarity International, has accredited status at the UN as an NGO. That means we have the right to go to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva to speak on the floor, to organize events at the Human Rights Council, and to interact with different UN special rapporteurs, different UN bodies. So we find this can be helpful to break a log jam sometimes. There was a case recently where there was a pastor in Nepal who was arrested on Christmas Day for distributing Christmas presents to children at a school. He was charged under Nepal's very strict and very vague anti-conversion law. And we told our partners in Nepal, we're going to the UN. Do you want us to say anything about Nepal? And they said, yes, can you mention this case on the floor? And we actually had a chance to mention it on the floor of the Human Rights Council while the ambassador from Nepal was present. And about a week later, we got word that this pastor had been acquitted, cleared of all charges. So Nepal has a new government right now, a new government that's very much under the microscope of the world, that's trying to show itself to be, a good actor, an actor that's open to change and open to reform. So that was an example of where we could really make a strategic use of our UN status to intervene in a very specific case. Other times, we're just there to keep an issue alive. Every Human Rights Council session for the past 2.5 years, we have gone there and we have talked about the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh, the complete expulsion of every Armenian Christian from their homeland by the dictatorship of Azerbaijan that happened in September 2023. And on September 27, 2023, that was actually our first opportunity to speak at the UN during my career, at least. And we talked about that. And we talked about that every Human Rights Council session since. And I have been told by other people who work in the UN system that there's so much pressure not to talk about Nagorno-Karabakh, not even to use the word Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh. So in that sense, it's very important that we have this opportunity to speak the word, to remember this place, to keep the world from forgetting what happened there.
How do we fundraise in a way that we are able to maintain our values, our mission, and stay independent so that we are not guided by any interests from above?
Mm-hmm. So we have, as CSI, to be as close to the people we want to attract as possible. So we have affiliates in several countries. In Switzerland, where CSI was founded in 1977. There are many people from several denominations and confessions. They think it's a good thing what CSI does, so that's why they give. So it's in our responsibility, with the money we have, to inform our donors, but also the media, to have local advocacy actions. So we have the international advocacy world, but then we have to adapt it to the context of the country. In this case, for CSI-Switzerland, it's Switzerland. So there is a Swiss parliament, there are members of the government, there are media. So we take what we have from international and we adapt it to the Swiss context, that they understand And we see that this is quite successful.
What are some of the topics, issues that CSI raises that very few others or no one else does? What are some of the things that make CSI unique in our advocacy?
We have a very good understanding that religious freedom is often a question of communities, not just individuals. It's extremely important for individuals as well, for individual liberty, but religion is usually practiced in community. And so religious freedom needs to be protected for communities. And so, for example, when the entire Armenian Christian population of Nagorno-Karabakh was under siege, threatened with genocide, we were there. We recognized this is an existential threat to one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, and we have to be there. For other organizations, it wasn't so clear because they're more focused on religious liberty as an individual matter. The other thing that makes us, that we try to do is to always align ourselves, if not against power, then at least perpendicular to power, right? It would be much easier if we were always trying to advance the agenda of the United States, for example, or of the European Union, or of the Western human rights world. We don't. We try to find the places where that agenda is failing the persecuted and make a lot of noise about it. So for example, in Syria, we've been campaigning for religious minorities in Syria for, I think, 12 years now. That's not a popular issue in the West, precisely because it doesn't align with the foreign policy goals of Washington, D.C. But for us, that's why it's important for us to be there, for us to talk about it loudly.
So, Joel, you mentioned the issue with Nagorno-Karabakh for the people that were displaced, and also the situation in Syria. And what we often see is, compared to other NGOs, also Christian NGOs, especially in Switzerland, they focus on humanitarian aid, but they do not so much focus on the whole human rights work. And we are a Christian human rights organization, right? So we focus on certain issues that are quite specific and also controversy. So for us, it's very important to be independent and to have our own agenda, and not to have money from, let's say, from the state or from the government, and then we have to follow their agenda.
Now, we've talked about the role of media in furthering advocacy. Can you talk a little bit about the role media can and should play in raising issues of religious persecution? And perhaps you can give an example of a success story where media was able to shine a light on an egregious case and change things for the better.
Right. Around 2009 in Pakistan, a woman who was a mother, Asia Bibi, was accused of blasphemy, and courts convicted her for alleged blasphemy, and she was on death row. But because first it was some Pakistani newspapers that reported on it, and then the Western press talked about it quite a lot, it became a global issue, and pressure was built, and we saw that she was finally acquitted, and she was able to move out of the country, and she now lives safely.
You're the CEO of CSI-Switzerland. What are some of the major advocacy topics going on now in Switzerland for CSI?
What we have very busy within the last 2 years was actually to support the displaced people from Nagorno-Karabakh on an advocacy level in Switzerland. So we had there in Parliament a motion accepted with a big majority that Switzerland, official Switzerland, should organize a peace forum where Azerbaijan and representatives from Nagorno-Karabakh come together to have a dialogue with international presence and to find a solution that the people from Nagorno-Karabakh can go back to their homeland. So that was really quite astonishing that that happened. and that the parliament accepted this motion. Now the challenge is that our government is not that ready or willing to fulfill what they got from the parliament. So there, many actions are going on. We are in touch with members of parliament.
And that I can see that the CSI advocacy is very holistic, because while that was going on with the government in Switzerland, it was a success, the resolution was accepted. CSI was also doing fact-finding trips, missions to Armenia. And again, we're not only involved in humanitarian work, but taking people on the ground, helping the media understand what's going on. Joel, could you just briefly give a little explanation of the Armenia trips that CSI has undertaken over the past year? How does taking people on the ground, not only our CSI staff, but members of the Swiss government, reporters, how does that further our advocacy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really important for us to use our independence to bring other people on board to the issues that we're working on. So in Armenia, what we're seeing now is that the Armenian government has actually begun to persecute the Armenian National Church for political reasons. They see the church as a threat to their power and a threat to their agenda. But for us, that is a clear religious freedom crisis, and a crisis for actually the entire Armenian nation. So working with very talented, very professional partners in Armenia, we've been able to bring members of the Swiss parliament, journalists from various media outlets to Armenia to meet with these activists, to meet with lawyers for the members of the clergy who are detained, even to visit one of the archbishops who's detained in prison. So we feel this is extremely important for Armenians, so that they feel they're not actually alone in this fight, that there are people from other parts of the world who are interested, who are coming, who are watching, seeing what's happening. It's also very important for Christians in the West to know what's going on in Armenia, to care for their co-religionists, for the other parts of the body of Christ.
What are some success stories, if I might ask, of the past year or so? Perhaps, Simon, you can offer something where either we were able to come to the aid of a victim or further the cause of religious freedom.
I was able to visit Pakistan, and for me that was very impressive to see how our local partners work, what kind of approach they have to help. So they, first of all, they are locals. They understand the language of the victims. They know the culture. They know where to go. They also know where not to go. That's important. And they know where they have to focus. So that's, for us, really very important as CSI. So I could join. We could travel around, also in sensitive areas. We could visit victims. And one of the most impressive engagement I have was with two brothers, 15-year-old brothers. They were wrongly accused of blasphemy. So they were taken in jail for 8 months. And after 8 months, because of legal help also with CSI, they were able to leave prison and to come back to the family. Of course, now they have to hide, so we take care of the family, and it's a very sensitive issue. But so that's something I see from like the international advocacy level, really to the local context. We have a connection, and that's very important.
Vishal, as a journalist, how do you view the role of CSI? How do you see CSI's work as unique?
I would say that I'm very touched, and I see CSI as extremely successful, because I look at justice as having two aspects, and one leads to the other. First, there is acknowledgement of an issue, and then accountability. Many times, journalists and people in the civil society are disheartened when they look at, the impact. When they look for impact, we kept raising an issue, but little changed. But from a victim's perspective, if you give them acknowledgement that what happened to them was wrong, this is something which gives them a sense of a level of justice. Otherwise, it's extremely difficult for people to suffer in silence without any acknowledgement.
That actually reminds me of one of the slogans that we have, which is not only religious liberty, freedom, but human dignity. Would any of you like to just talk about the link between those two concepts? Why is religious freedom so important to human dignity?
If religious freedom is violated, many other human rights are violated too, right? Like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. So we have to keep that in mind. And where Christians are persecuted, other minorities are often or almost always also persecuted. So this is one thing, and as a Christian human rights organization, we believe that God created us, human beings, that He loves us. And I think this we have to bear in mind, that the human dignity is from the perspective God has also for us. So this religious freedom, like also to freely to pray, to practice our faith, and on the other hand, to have this human dignity because God wanted us to be free, to take our own decisions. That's very important. But please, Joel.
One of the most important thinkers about religious freedom that influences our work at CSI was Charles Malik, who was a Lebanese statesman who was also principally responsible for drafting the UN Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And he saw religious freedom as really key to the whole concept of human dignity, because it's not just about having enough food to eat, it's not just about having your material needs met, it's about what makes you a human being, that you are, as Simon said, created, that you have the ability to have a relationship with something much higher than yourself. You have the ability to strive to improve yourself, to become better. You're not just living for your own self or your own family, you're living for something much bigger than yourself. And Charles Malik thought it was so important that every person be free to explore that capability for himself or for herself. So that's why Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is written the way it is. It emphasizes that every person has the right to change their religion. That's not accidental. Charles Malik was from Lebanon. He knew that in Islamic Sharia law, one of the worst sins, one of the worst crimes, is to leave Islam and go to a different religion. And the Islamic states that were involved in the drafting of the declaration fought Charles Malik on this, but he did not give an inch. And that's a great legacy that we have from him that we have to preserve.
And something else that comes to mind, and you touched on this earlier, but that we are not only in solidarity with Christians, but we are coming at this religious freedom cause from our Christianness. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to be Christian Solidarity International? Who are we in solidarity with?
Yeah, for example, in northern Iraq, the community that suffered the worst from the genocide perpetrated by the Islamic State were not Christians. They were Yazidis, right? This ancient religious group that has lived in Upper Mesopotamia since time immemorial, but were seen as infidels by the Islamic State and were subjected to systematic executions, enslavement, and sexual violence. And to this day, most of them are displaced because their homeland was, first of all, destroyed by the Islamic State and is now the subject to a power struggle between two different factions in the Iraqi government. So what we've been able to do with our partners is set up a legal center in northern Iraq that helps Yazidis restore the documents they might have lost during the genocide, restore their claims to their property, find a way to get their life started again. And when we do that, when we defend the rights of non-Christians, we're defending the rights of everybody. There's no future for Christians in the Middle East if the Middle East is not a place where everyone is safe to be who they are.